Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're tackling a very special, deeply personal request. Someone reached out with a pretty profound question. They asked, can you give me a brief history lesson on what you know about my father, Uriel? Well, absolutely. We're going to dive right into the life of Uriel James Cecil. And, this isn't your typical story of massive, flashy fame or some global fortune. No, it's actually a profoundly moving case study in resilience, quiet greatness, and the sheer, enduring power of family. By digging through carefully preserved family records, timelines, and deeply personal reflections from the Cecil book archives, we're going to trace a life that weathered unimaginable early tragedy to build an absolutely rock-solid legacy. Let's get started.
To really wrap our heads around Uriel, we honestly have to start with the impact he left behind. His eldest son, Todd, wrote a tribute on the very day Uriel passed away, and it's incredibly touching. He describes his father as his hero, a man whose core principles, those building blocks of reliability and absolute trust, literally shaped his entire worldview. But to understand exactly how Uriel became this absolute rock for his family, we have to go back to the beginning. And that beginning, well, was marked by some pretty unimaginable heartbreak.
All right, Section 1. Roots and Early Tragedies. We're heading back to the late 1930s and 40s, a time when life could just, turn completely upside down in the blink of an eye. The stark reality of Uriel's earliest years is, honestly, brutal. He was born in Cicero, Illinois, in February of 1938, and his childhood was shattered almost right out of the gate. In 1945, when Uriel was just a little boy, his mother, Patricia, tragically passed away from tuberculosis. She was incredibly young, just 26 years old. After that, the family relocated to Howardstown, Kentucky. But tragedy struck again less than a year later. His father, Alfred, died in a fatal car crash right there in Kentucky. So by the time he was just 6 years old, literally kindergarten age, Uriel, who actually went by his middle name Jim or Daba to his family, was completely orphaned.
When you think about young Uriel at that age with his whole life ahead of him, it's just hard to fathom the profound loss he had to process. But he wasn't left alone. After his father's death, Uriel and his infant sister Sylvia were taken in by their extended family. His grandmother, who was this incredibly tough woman running the local Howardstown general and liquor store to support a massive family of her own, stepped up alongside aunts and uncles. He was basically absorbed right into the deep, highly protective embrace of his ancestral community in Kentucky.
And this is a crucial point. Uriel didn't just move to any random town. He was rooted in Howardstown, Kentucky. This area was widely known as the American Holy Land. It was settled by the League of Catholic Families who came over from Maryland way back in the 1780s. The Cecils, they were absolute pioneer stock. Growing up there, surrounded by sprawling, hardworking farms, the Rolling Fork River, and the ecclesiastical heart of the whole community at St. Anne's Catholic Church, Uriel was completely steeped in a culture of hard work, immense resilience, and this deep, unwavering faith. And it was that exact foundation that would end up guiding the rest of his life.
Moving on to Section 2, Service, Career, and Faith. So, how does a young orphan boy step out into the wider world? Well, with service, a steadfast career, and an ironclad faith. Taking that very first big step, Uriel proudly served his country in the United States Air Force. He literally took that gritty Kentucky work ethic straight into the military, and that kicked off a long, highly trusted career in aviation mechanics.
And his career, it's the absolute definition of quiet greatness. After his military service wrapped up, Uriel transitioned into a civilian role as a jet engine technician at Andrews Air Force Base. Now get this, he was so incredibly reliable, so highly trusted, that he passed all the rigorous top-tier clearances required to service the engines of Air Force One. And he did this under 2 different U.S. presidents. Think about the immense, staggering responsibility of that role. There is no room for error there. And he didn't even stop working when he officially retired. He just kept on serving his community, driving a bus for local assisted living facilities and running his own handyman business, where he often just did charity work for the elderly.
But, what truly defined Uriel wasn't just his impressive resume, it was his unwavering principles. Todd's family records note a deeply powerful detail about Uriel's marriage to his wife, Nancy. Eventually, the two of them had a falling out and separated, but Uriel, who was so deeply rooted in the Catholic faith of his Howardstown ancestors, absolutely refused to get a divorce. They remained married apart for decades, right up until she passed away. He stood by the vows he made, no matter how difficult or lonely the circumstances got. I mean, that is the literal definition of steadfast.
Let's look at Section 3, Family Life and Heartbreak. We're going to shift our focus to the family life he actively built and some of the really heartbreaking challenges they ended up facing together.
Despite all the chaotic, early tragedy of his own childhood, Uriel managed to build this incredibly stable home for his young family. He and Nancy raised 4 kids, Todd, Mark, Shannon, and Matthew, in a modest 2-story home in College Park, Maryland. As Todd recalls it, Uriel always ensured there was a solid roof over their heads. He just worked tirelessly to provide the kind of grounding and stability that was robbed from him when he was a boy.
And this sets up a really powerful generational reflection. When Todd turned 48, he actually sat down and documented a comparison between his life and his dad's life at that exact same age. At 48, Uriel was married, living in that modest Maryland home, and super busy raising 4 kids, the youngest being just 4 years old. Todd, on the other hand, at 48, noted he was living in a large, 5-bedroom home in Florida with his wife, but without any children of his own. Now, Todd wasn't making this comparison to brag at all, quite the opposite, actually. He wrote that he knew he would always be, in his words, overshadowed by the accomplishments of my father. It's just this beautiful, humble realization of the massive sacrifices Uriel made to completely change his family's trajectory.
But life, as we all know, is rarely just a simple, smooth, upward climb, right? So, how does a family endure the completely unimaginable? Because for Uriel, the toughest trial of his entire adult life arrived out of nowhere in 2013.
In November of 2013, Uriel suffered the profound, agonizing grief of losing his youngest son, Matthew. Matthew was the baby of the family. He's described in the Circe book archives as the golden child who just naturally brought everyone together. At the time, Matthew was 31 years old and living with Uriel at his home in Maryland. Tragically, Matthew took his own life, leaving behind absolutely no notice or clues. For a father who had already lost his own parents so violently and at such a young age, this sudden, completely inexplicable loss of a child was just a devastating, devastating blow. So how do you cope with that kind of immense grief? Well, the family turned to memory and to legacy. They created the Cecil book Afterworld, which is this really amazing digital space Todd built to pay tribute to the special ones they lost. It became this vital way to process the grief of losing Matthew and later on other family members too. It's a beautiful testament to keeping a spiritual relationship totally alive, remembering the really good times right alongside the sad ones. Okay, Section 4. Final years and legacy. Let's look at the incredible full-circle nature of his legacy as we reach the final chapter of our explainer today. In his final years, we see this really beautiful, touching role reversal. As Uriel's health started to decline, he placed his life completely in the hands of his son Todd and his daughter-in-law Cheryl. They sold his longtime home in Maryland, and Uriel moved down to a cozy in-law suite at their home in Odessa, Florida. As he required more hands-on care, he gracefully transitioned to a rehabilitation facility and then an assisted living facility, aided really closely by the wonderful folks at hospice. Finally, surrounded by the spiritual prayers of his son, Uriel passed away peacefully on the night of September 20th, 2025. Reflecting on this whole transition, Todd wrote something that really hits home. He said, "It was a feeling like I was a parent now. My dad placed his complete trust in me. It was the greatest honor in my life." Just take a second to imagine that, being the childless couple who suddenly, willingly steps up to parent the very man who was their childhood hero. Uriel's ability to just completely let go and trust his son in those incredibly vulnerable final years, it speaks absolute volumes about the unbreakable bond they shared.
And so, the whole story comes completely full circle. Todd noted that Uriel's final resting place would be right back where it all began, his hometown of Howardstown, Kentucky. The orphaned boy who grew up along the Rolling Fork River, who went out into the big wide world to serve presidents and raise a family, was returning to the historic, hallowed soil of his ancestors at St. Anne's, a life fully, truly lived, finally at rest.
So what is the big takeaway for us here today? I think Uriel James Cecil's life teaches us that true greatness absolutely does not require a megaphone. It's built in the quiet, everyday choices, right? It's showing up for work, it's standing by your vows, it's providing a solid roof for your kids, and it's deeply trusting the family you've built when you need them the most. And I think it leaves us with a pretty provocative question. How will your own everyday, quiet choices echo through your family's history? Are you building a foundation that's strong enough to last for generations? Think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and we will definitely see you next time.